Yes, it's a beautiful morning here in the nation's capital in Abuja. I am Ayuba Ilya right here on Trust TV's Daybreak show. Welcome to the program, and we're super excited to have you join us on the program. I won't be doing this alone, of course. Good morning, Sunday.
Indeed. Good morning, Ayuba. It's a beautiful Monday morning, and we hope to bring you all of the best happening around the country to stimulate the kind of conversation that are important for national development. I am Sunday Michael Ogo.
Yes, today begins a new chapter, really. The long-awaited tribunal, election tribunal for the presidential election will begin today, and a lot of expectations on the judiciary, a lot of submissions, a lot of arguments and debates about this whole trial. A lot of people somehow are of the view that perhaps the inauguration of May 29 should be reconsidered, whether or not to go ahead with it or to postpone that and wait to, exhaust the election tribunal, before the process.
Absolutely. There had been perspectives and different perspectives. I think the honest net was stirred by Cardinal John Onaikon when he said it would have been proper that tribunal cases are decided before you go into swearing in. I think the idea is it becomes practically impossible for, after swearing in a new president who has taken over as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, to then begin to, he becomes distracted from his responsibility, and all that conversation around whether or not he has earned his position legally and all of that. But those are arguments that have their points, they have their merit and demerit, and they will continue to be there in the public domain.
And some of the demerits, of course, will be what then happens if you decide that the inauguration should be postponed. What then happens to the constitutional arrangements where the current president is expected to have leave the office? If he leaves the office, then what happens? They're talking about maybe interim government?
Yes, it creates a vacuum under the current arrangements, but I think it is something that it's a debate that is worth having, especially because the country is a going concern. Maybe in the future we may think of having an election 6 months before handover, so that gives room for all of these kind of cases to be decided. But however you look at it, they have their strengths and demerits. We hope that whatever message that there is in all of these agitations, that we are able to listen to them with an open mind and learn the lessons that there are and move on as a country.
And we're just barely, I would say, how many days now? 21 days to the inauguration itself. We are beginning the election tribunal today. That leaves you with 3 weeks to decide on whatever the outcome was,
which is practically impossible, by the way.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at the headlines.
Absolutely.
Those the honors.
All right. The headline are COVID-19 no longer public health emergency. That is according to the WHO.
Police raid kidnappers' den, rescue 58 hostages in Kogi.
And enhancing gender digital inclusion for West African women.
All right, now the details. The Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, has declared that COVID-19 is no longer a public health emergency of international concern. He made the declaration on Friday after a review of current evidence that shows that there is high population level immunity from the SARS-CoV-2 infection, improved knowledge of the virus and management of confirmed COVID-19 cases, a decline in the global burden of the virus, and also a steady increase in vaccine uptake across the countries. Now, following the declaration, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control and Prevention, NCDC, issued a statement on Sunday disclosing that Nigeria had already de-escalated its COVID-19 response since 2022 in response to local epidemiology focused on encouraging COVID-19 vaccination and recommended discretionary use of face masks and other public health safety measures according to personal risk assessments.
That's some good news there. Perhaps it will also lead to reduce formalities around foreign travels around major airports in the world. And moving on, operatives of the Nigeria Police Force have rescued 58 kidnapped victims held hostage to Dulu Forest in Gegu local government area of Kogi State, bordering Sardauna Forest in Nasarawa State, and other identified kidnappers' den in communities contagious to the Federal Capital Territory. However, one of the victims, Tama Jonathan, unfortunately sustained injury during the rescue operations and died on the spot. FCT police spokesperson SP Josephine Ada said the rescue was part of an effort by the FCT command leadership in a sustained joint operations with other security agencies, vigilantes and hunters from the various local communities to combat violent crimes in the FCT, rescue victims and bring perpetrators to book.
All right, now the growing quest for a total transformation of the digital economy of the member countries of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, once again dominated discussion as regional leaders strategized to bridge the gender gap in all sectors. This was the focus of a town hall meeting organized by the ECOWAS Female Parliamentarians Association in Abuja at the weekend with the theme Rejuvenate Democracy by Giving Voice to Women and Youth. The National Information Technology Development Agency, which is under Nigeria's Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy, keyed into the program and urged for the expansion of digital skill and capacity building for women and youth West Africa to bridge the gender gap.
All right, and that's it on the news highlight at this moment. Moving on to our packages. As Kenyan President Patrick Lumumba has advised Nigerian politicians to accept whatever verdict that will come out of the election petition tribunal for the sake of the peace and unity of the country. He gave the advice in Lafayette, the Nasarawa State capital, while delivering a lecture at the 2023 annual Sir Ahmadu Bello Memorial Leadership and Good Governance Lecture and Award. Correspondent Abubakar Abdullahi sent in the report as presented from our studios.
I am suggesting to Nigeria that the mistakes that have been made are mistakes which offer us an opportunity to improve our electoral system. I'm saying that when the tribunals have looked at all the cases, whichever verdict they arrive at, let the verdicts be accepted in grace. Not because tribunals are perfect, no, but history has taught us that when we want to resolve our disputes and we have chosen certain mechanisms for doing so, once they have rendered their verdict, even in their imperfection, for the sake of good order, we accept them, we grumble, we go home and say, hey, well. The most important enduring phase of Africa might well prove to be that presented by Nigeria. It is important for Nigeria to succeed because if Nigeria succeeds, Africa succeeds, and the reverse is true. On this, I completely agree without hesitation to what Professor Lumumba has said.
Sir Ahmadu Bello Memorial Foundation, as concerned stakeholders in the affairs of northern states in particular, Nigeria in general, and the African continent, deliberately chose the theme, credible 2023 general elections, as panacea for search for quality leadership.
Of that. And the foundation wants me to plead with all the other governors that most of the, not that we just attend the events, but we go to the extent of making promises about what we will contribute to sustain the foundation. And in most cases, we don't provide what we say about the pledges. So I want you to use the opportunity to do that. They want me to use the opportunity to plead with you, and not just you, but all those who can afford to continue to support this.
All right, just a few corrections there. Patrick Lumumba was never as Kenyan president. He's the chairman of the Patrick Lumumba Foundation. We hope you take our apologies for that. Moving on, farmers in Sharawa community in Daura local government area of Katsina State are passing through hard times as a result of the collapse of Dabaram solar irrigation system. The project, which is being executed by the National Agricultural Land Development Authority, NALDA, the farmers said has been abandoned for 2 years. To make matters worse, security guards looking after the equipment at the site are complaining that they have been owed salaries of over 18 months. Geza Yakubu, who visited Daura, tells us more.
Dabiram Solar Irrigation System is one of the dam projects in Daura local government area of Katsina State, supplying water to farming communities around its axis. But the sudden collapse of its solar irrigation system has created a huge challenge to farmers relying on the project. The major problems the farmers are faced with are drying up of the water body feeding the irrigation scheme due to climate change and influx of farmers into irrigation farming. An equal huge obstacle is the breakdown of solar energy system, which was provided by the government for over 2 years. These difficulties have increased farming costs, especially as the farmers have to adopt the alternative use of water pumping machine to supply water to their farms.
Solar gwamnati ka mana solar, kuma solar mun ji dadin ta 100%. Tunda solar nan idan aka tada ta daga nan za ta tsallata titi ta kai ruwa. Kuma talakoki na Dabiram inda aka yi solar, inda gwamnati ta mana sun ji dadi 100%. To sola yanzu ta lalace, abinda muke kai kuka ga gwamnati, masu gadin nan suna gadi da ana ba su kuɗi, amma yanzu wata 18 ba a ba shi kuɗi ba.
Abdullahi Adamu and his brothers are constructing water canals as an alternative means of irrigation. They will have to use a pumping machine instead of solar that was provided by the government as a source of energy.
Sololin ne an samu damanar da ta wuce, ta zo mana da iska da tsawa duka dai ga sunan sun sololin sun fifita kuma wayoyin sun cicire na cikin sololin, shi ya sanya kuma ba a zo aka diba ba aka gyara mana su, shi ya sanya za mu gina wannan saboda in rani Allah ya kai mu lahiya kada amfanin mu ya lalace sai mu rika tadawa muna bar ruwa da shi.
Unlike farmers in Kura, Kano State, benefiting from the Hadejia Jamarin River Basin Development Authority, farmers in Sharawa, one of the communities benefiting from the solar irrigation system, cannot produce crop in 3 farming seasons. The challenges of irrigation in this region have overshadowed their farming capacity.
Saboda haka abinda ake roƙon gwamnati ko kuma in ce abinda ya rage yanzu a ce an gina riyoji na ƙasa wanda za su ba ruwa su ba dam ɗin ruwa su taimaka mashi ko da na damana sauka idan ruwa ya ɗauke aka buɗe su suka rika ba da ruwa to ruwa ba zai ƙare ba.
The farmers in Sharawa community say their only source of income is farming, and now that the dam is going through multiple challenges, they can only hope that the government will come to their rescue. Gaza Yakubu, Trust Television News, Daura.
All right, now the federal government has been called upon to invest more in the health sector in order to reduce the crave among Nigeria's elite for medical tourism. This call came as ex-Nigeria's Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu was jailed by a UK court for organ harvesting. The report.
The President-elect Bola Tinubu had, in a solidarity message on Workers' Day, promised more than living wage for workers to have a decent life and provide for their families. For these civil servants, it is cheering news and looking forward to May 29th when he will assume office. They, however, called on government to deploy price control mechanism to address rising inflation in the country.
It's a good news for the workers. At least they will have a very large package to take home, you know, and I hope that our marketers will not destroy the goodwill of Bola Ahmed Tinubu. You know, whenever there is an increase in price, then the marketers will also increase the goods, you know, the commodities prices will go high in the market. So I don't know, maybe government will have to do something about this, about markets as in price control.
It's a very nice idea because we workers were suffering at a long line. If they give you small salary, if you go market now, you buy some things. Before you buy everything now, your money don't finish. So you cannot get anything now. Talk about to pay your children's school fees and the other things. So it's a very good idea. That's what you are praying for.
Some believe the outgoing administration wasted the opportunity to improve workers' welfare through many unfulfilled promises, which made public service unattractive.
They have been promising us, we are not seeing the promises. So if it came to be as a change to others, let's see.
It is actually a good news for government to increase workers' salary. It means money will flow in the market and people will be happy doing their businesses. But the only advice for the government is how to control the price mechanism of the markets so that the inflation will not tell more on the citizens of the country.
By the grace of God, this president can work. All the promise we promise us, by the grace of God, we get hope. Say, he must make sure saying do us the thing we're supposed to be for our country.
They advise the incoming government to fulfill the promise and regulate prices of commodities such that salary increase will no longer trigger inflation. Kabir Lawal, Trust TV News, Abuja.
Once again, we apologize for the mix-up in that report. We would now take a short break. When we return, we'll serve you headlines from the newspapers. Please stay with us.
Thank you for staying. Time to take a look at the dailies on Daybreak, and we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. The lead story here talks about the speakership. That's talking about the principal offices of the National Assembly, particularly the House of Representatives. It says, aspirants move against Tinubu's anointed candidate. It has the writer that says, what attracted me to President-elect Abbas? We were not consulted, was his camp. Endorsement, mere speculation. Gagdi. You have Betara declares today, no central spoils for fight. All the details on page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Above the lead story, tribunal begins hearing Atiku, Obi, 3 other petitions today. You find that on page 13. Mixed feelings in Kano over Kwankwaso's statement on Sanusi's dethronement, and that's on page 3. 77 trillion naira debt, failed subsidy, 3 other issues Tinubu will inherit from Buhari on page 22. Also, the pictorial there shows you passengers of Max Air that we understand yesterday were disembarked when the plane conveying them crash landed at the Abuja airport, the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport. Thankfully, no one was injured. 144 passengers unhurt as Max Air plane crash lands in Abuja. Crash lands, yes. Many flights cancelled. Safety Bureau probes incident. You'll find that on page 31. Now, beside that, you have NAFDAC raises alarm over importation of banned pesticides from UK on page 36. Man beats son to death for stealing 1 mudu of millet, and that on page 20. Quite a tragic story. I mean, what's the worth of 1 mudu of millet compared to a son? Learn from Sudan experience, NSCIA tells Nigerians, and all that on page 7. These are some of the top stories on the cover page of the Daily Trust newspaper today.
All right, we move on to the Punch newspaper now. It is leading with a different story. Asset declaration. Code of Conduct Bureau tells Tinubu others to submit forms before May 29th. With the riders, asset declaration ongoing in 36 states. No swearing in without form submission, CCB. Bureau says defaulters risk removal from office. 40 Ogun politicians obtain forms. Into other stories there, fuel landing tanker crashes, ground Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. You see pictures there of the tanker directly below a pedestrian flyover, and you also see to the right of that pictures the long queues occasioned by that incident. Two other stories, subsidy removals. Nigeria may spend 8 trillion on petrol in 6 months. You find the details of that on page 9. Protests as Northwest backs Akpabio for Senate presidency. And my ordeal with aggressive breast cancer. This is coming from Desiani, former petroleum minister. FGF lift 888 Nigerians from Egypt, plans more evacuation. And Osimhen from Lagos Street hawker to a Serie A goal king. You recall that Osimhen was crowned, his team was crowned the champion of the Italian league over the weekend. And passengers stranded, flight grounded as FG shuts Abuja runway. These are the major stories on the front page of the Punch newspaper.
All right, now let's take a look at this day newspaper, where you have the lead story talk about the leadership tussle of the National Assembly. 10th National Assembly, APC NWC meets today to ratify consensus on zoning. You have the leadership tussle worsens as 68 senators elect reject deal. Group wants Tinubu party not to plunge themselves into crisis. Southeastern senators caution president-elect against injustice. ACF disassociates itself from ex-Niger Delta minister's endorsement. You have also over 143 passengers escape death as Max Air crash lands in Abuja. Dangote, my refinery can save Nigeria $10 billion in FX, generate another $10 billion in exports. You have PDP, APC plotting to influence outcome of petitions at tribunal. You have Badaru to Wike, thank you for helping APC sabotage PDP in Rivers State. Buhari directs NUPRC to take over supervision of all crude oil export terminals. These are the main stories on this day newspaper for front page.
And moving on to the Daily Times. Senate presidency, Buhari Tinubu loyalist battle for the soul of APC. And you have also there pictures of the punctured wheel of the mass air flight yesterday that crash landed at the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport. Senate demands refunds of 726 million contract money from Osun River Basin Authority. Police recruitment tussle. PSC approves salary payments for 1,007 intakes. And DRC, Nigeria Business Council, investors eye energy, transports, and agri sector. Dangote new refinery for inauguration May 22nd. And incessant failure of transactions spur growth of new digital banks in Nigeria. These are the major stories on the front page of the Daily Times.
All right, now let's take a look at the Blueprint newspaper this morning. You have the lead story there talking about Sudan crisis. It says, how we trekked for hours, slept outside for days, student evacuees. The writer says, vow never to return to war-torn country after ceasefire. I pray Nigeria never goes into war. Returnee. Over 800 returnees arrive Abuja on page 6. All that Ndache's trilogy in honor of Buratai for launch in Abuja Saturday. You also have a panic as plane crash lands at Abuja Airport. PDP raises concerns as tribunal begins sitting today. Cyber threats, weak infrastructure challenges of Nigeria's payment system. That's according to the CBN. Senate presidency, tread with caution. Southeast lawmakers tell Tinubu APC. ACF, Northwest Group kick against Akpabio. Ruling party takes decision today. And that's on page 5 of the Blueprint newspaper. These are the main stories on the cover page.
Moving on to the Nigerian News Direct. Senate presidency, Tinubu Buhari loyalist in last-minute battle. Emulates Amadu Bello leadership qualities. Buhari tax politicians. Man kills wife for allegedly planning to leave him. Well, he has lost her anyways. Over 1,000 passengers stranded at Abuja Airport over Max Air incident. Fidelity Bank target 5 acquisition in Africa after UK purchase. And 10th National Assembly leadership zoning suffers as tough political gimmicks plunge party in confusion. You have pictures there of the Executive Chairman, Federal Inland Revenue Service, Mr. Mohamed Nami, receiving the ICANN Merit Award from President Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, Malam Tijani, recently. And these are the major stories on the front page of the Nigerian News Direct.
All right. Now, on the Daily Independent newspaper this morning, the lead story there, it says 22.7 trillion naira, 22.7 trillion naira Ways and Means loans securitization seen as mixed bag. You also have Seraph sues FG over failure to recover double pay from ex-governors. Oshibajo flags off Imo's Oguta Orashi River dredging Thursday. At last, Buhari inaugurates Dangote refinery May 22. Villagers panic as Zamfara bandits relocate to Katsina. Arewa Consultative Forum kicks against Akpabio as Senate President. 144 passengers cheat death as Max Air flight crash lands in Abuja. Kenyan President Ruto dispatches special envoy to Tinubu. These are the main stories on the Daily Independent newspaper.
All right, moving on to this, Nigeria legal fireworks begins. As presidential election tribunal begins sitting today, parties upbeat, confident justice will be served. And there you have pictures of the president-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu, former Vice President Abubakar Atiku, and the Labour Party presidential candidate Peter Obi, as well as General Al-Mustafa, who was also a presidential candidate in the last election. To other stories, Sudan, over 800 Nigerians evacuees arrive in Abuja. And there you find a picture of Max Air flight, which was involved in a crash yesterday at the Nnamdi Azikiwe Stadium. I refuse to anoint candidates to ensure equal contest, Buhari. Judgment, Syrup files contempt suit against FG for failing to recover double pay from ex-governors. And 68 medical doctors, others escape death as Max Air crash land at Abuja Airport. Authorities shut down airport several hours. Aviation workers blame FG for one runway. These are the major stories on the front page of this Nigeria.
Okay, so let's take a look at the Vanguard newspaper. The lead story is still talking about the leadership tussle at the 10th National Assembly. It says, we will exploit confusion in APC to produce speaker, opposition parties. You have the writer that says, cede Senate presidency to Southeast, Senate caucus task Tinubu APC, LP 35-member caucus weighs option to vote en bloc. Awase, Betara, Jaji, Soli, Pool 287-member alliance. Agbaja, Faleke disagree over alleged misinformation. Gagdi intensifies battle, unveils agenda for reps. You also have above the masthead, Ekwere Madu, Gregory Varsity proprietor seeks King Charles intervention. FG confirms May 22 for planned inauguration of 650,000 barrels per day Dangote refinery. You also have agri sector grows defies 1.8 trillion naira loan infusions. Also, you have the Max Air story. It says, we owe God our lives, passengers recount ordeal. These are the main stories on the front page of the Vanguard newspaper.
All right, moving on to the Guardian newspaper. It's staying with a different headline. Business opt for unconventional debts as interest rates near 35%. You want the details of that? You look up page 6. The 10th National Assembly revote loans in APC as members kick against imposition of candidate. Sudan crisis. We slept on the floor as bullet killed people in bed. And Oshun, public education infrastructure in dire straits. It's a news analysis on page 4. And a diesel tanker accident worsened gridlock on Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. These are the major stories on the front page of The Guardian.
All right, now let's take a look at the next paper. The Abuja Inquirer is the next paper that we are looking at this morning. And it has the lead story that says, in major swoop, FCT police rescue 58 kidnapped victims. It has the writer that says, one victim killed in shootout, man-o-war gunned down gang leader, operations covered, Kogi, Nasarawa State. You have also below the masthead there, Abuja to beef security around public schools. FCTA demolishes 10,000 illegal structures in 8 years. Scientists slow aging by engineering longevity in cells. You also have motorists accused AMAC task force of harassment, multiple levies. NAMI, FRS chairman, wins ICANN Merit Award. These are the main stories on the Abuja Inquirer.
All right, we move on to First News. Leading there with the story, presidential pool, legal fireworks begins as Tinubu Atiku Obi lawyers clash at tribunal. And to other stories there, Akpabio Senate presidency matters arising by Afegbo. And the airport closed to traffic over Max Air crash land. These are some of the major stories that we have on the First News newspaper this morning.
All right. Now let's get some perspectives to some of these stories that we have this morning, and we begin with the leadership tussle of the National Assembly, talking about all the debates, the politicking, the lobbying, the intricacies involved in selecting principal officers of the National Assembly, talking about the House of Representatives and the Senate. And this is following the outcome of the presidential elections. A lot of talk about zoning arrangements, a lot of talk about balancing, the power structure in the country and all of that. And this is what is informing the battle, if you like, within the All Progressives Congress, which is a ruling party. We have seen the emergence of other political parties in the House of Representatives, which forms the opposition. The opposition now in the majority in the House of Representatives, thanks to the 2023 general elections, where we saw the emergence of political parties like the Labour Party, the NNPP, the SDP, the PDP itself, the APC, having members all at the House of Representatives. So it's no longer the usual practice where you have two major political parties. Either you are, one opposition or one ruling party. So it's no longer the case. This time you have a number of opposition political parties in the House of Representatives. Perhaps is what makes the whole thing more interesting this time around. What's the fate of the APC in the House of Representatives? That's a major issue here.
Yeah, interesting developments there taking place at the House of Representatives. Like you have correctly highlighted, it is no longer a situation where a single party decides within its caucus what he wants to do and simply come to the House and execute. You now have the majority from the opposition party, so somehow whoever emerges would need the blessings of the opposition party. And by a trick of fate, the opposition party needs just one vote from the APC to also anoint a candidate. So it has been very tough politicking, especially with the whole conversation around the House wanting to be seen as an independent House. And so having its leader come from within its own arrangements, rather than have a president anoint what people would rather describe as a rubber stamp. In a democracy, that should be different. And as we saw in the United States, even with majorities coming from a party, it took them several days to be able to agree on, several votes, if you like, to be able to agree on who the speaker would be. So what is happening is not out of place. If there is anything, it reflects the beauty of democracy. We'll see how far these people will be able to withstand what appears to be the anointed candidate of the president-elect. Some are claiming that they were not consulted. Others are saying that people are misadvising the president-elect into anointing a candidate. Well, he has not admitted in the open that he's got a candidate, but we'll continue to see how these developments unfolds ahead of the inauguration. The party meets today to sort of douse tension and see whether they can get.
Another key point of the considerations here is the issue of zoning and balancing of the structure here in terms of the principal officers. So a lot of arguments about the fact that at the presidential level you have President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu and his vice Kashim Shettima, who are both Bola Tinubu, who is from the southwestern part of the country, a Muslim, and also you have Kashim Shettima from the northeastern part of the country, a Muslim as well. So those who are making the argument that perhaps the Senate presidency, for instance, should shift to the southern part of the country, specifically the southeastern part of the country, are making the argument that for the sake of balancing equity, justice, and fairness, and the rest of them. But we didn't see that play out, during the primaries of the APC presidential election. Yes, it was thrown open to everyone, but then at the end of the day, we saw the outcome of the APC primaries, and there was not so much of discussions about issue of balancing and all that. But all of a sudden, some people feel that those who are in the APC making the argument up in issue about the ticket of the APC candidate, who some people feel was not balanced, are now making the argument for having a balance, maybe because they are going to be beneficiaries of some sort and all that. So these are the kinds of arguments that we are hearing. And others are of the view that, look, why don't you think about those who gave you, the votes, the large number of votes, and vote in that direction. So they feel that the northwestern part of the country, for instance, should be compensated in some way for voting massively for the APC in the presidential elections. Those are the kinds of arguments that we see, but it's not new for politicians. Politicians will always make arguments for or against certain things, depending on whatever stands to be in their favor.
I agree with you. It's beginning to look like I did A for you, you have to do B for me. In the last election, it was the West telling the North Central that, the election that brought in President Muhammadu Buhari, the argument was that we voted for you, we supported yours when it was your sons, it is now turn. I hope in all of this conversation we find a place to understand that this democracy is fragile, even at 50-something years old. It's a multi-ethnic democracy. There's a reason why we have the federal character. In this case, even though it cannot be wished upon the politicians, it's important that we take some of this consideration on board and create a leadership that speaks to every part of it, where people can look at it and see a semblance of themselves, no matter how small that is. Because if it boils down to just where you got votes from, that I'm not sure how the leadership will be, because eventually this kind of thinking would permeate even the decision makings and the allocation of resources. And what that does is sort of widen the gap of the suspicion we already have about ourselves, because clearly what people are seeing, even from the way current government officials have behaved, is that until one of yours is there is no chance that the part of the country where you come from, we get a share of the national cake. We see ministers taking federal universities to their own constituency. We see presidents taking federal projects to their constituency. We see defense chiefs taking universities and military installations to their places. And whether or not there were strategic considerations for those things or just the patronage, we are yet to understand by the way these things have happened. So we see governors citing viable economic projects, very huge economic projects in their constituencies. Whether or not it is the best place to be strategically becomes a different debate. So these kind of characters and these kind of arguments are the reasons why people are not comfortable until they see one of their own in the mix, So the argument is valid, and I hope somehow that reasons would prevail for us to strengthen this democracy, for us to foster unity and togetherness. Then it's important that in whatever we do, in whatever mix we are trying to put together, we find a place for ethnic minorities.
And I think that is also very important to note that for people in public offices, they should understand that they are not in there for themselves, but they are there, especially if it's at the national level. You are in there in the interest of the entire country, in the interest of the entire nation, not in the interest of your own people, because you are a federal man, so to say. So, for instance, you are a president you are expected to what? To make appointments based on the federal character like the Constitution have provided for. But that has not necessarily been the case from what we've seen in the past few years. A lot of complaints about nepotism, a lot of complaints about making appointment based on, these political, ethnic considerations, and the rest of them. And that has further validated these things, these arguments that we are saying, and gives it a booster, sort of. People continue to think that unless they see someone from their place, then they are not, in the picture. And that's because we have not seen individuals, we have not seen public office holders who dispassionately, without fear or favor, without any sort of partiality, govern and show that, look, it doesn't matter where you come from. We are all Nigerians, and I think that that's very important for us to really entrench democracy and see Nigeria grow as a nation.
That's absolute. We seem to forget history so quick. Those of us who were born in northern Nigeria, who grew up here, who were, we got bread and butter from this part of the world, know so much about the story of the Sardauna and how he cited projects across this country, how he encouraged people from every nook and cranny of northern Nigeria. The Sardauna legacy is the reason why people like Bishop Onaikon were educated. When the stories were told of how he came out with the best WAEC result, and he was sent for by the Sardauna. That story, we can confirm that independently. So, we have forgotten the spirit of forerunners, how they did things to unite this country and for the interest of this country. So you go to some states with 3 senatorial zones, but just 1 senatorial zone houses everything. Federal, state university, federal medical center, the generals between the states. So everybody from every other part of the state sort of commits to that place. What I'm saying in essence is you are beginning to see this attitude even trickles down to states with multi-ethnic colorations. They don't trust each other. You know the story in Benue, you know the story in Delta. And so every time there is an election there, it feels like war because everybody is trying to get into something just so that their people can have a share. We can begin to correct this impression if we find a way and a system that sort of brings everybody on
and the
board.
people also need to be understanding that, look, when you have the fact that you have someone from your place in public office doesn't necessarily mean that he has to now come over and do everything, just for you and you alone. Because sometimes the people are the problem, really. When public office holders are in office and they try to, be neutral, be fair to everybody, it becomes a problem. You begin to hear his people begin to call him names and all that. So that's also very important. But I would like for us to take a look at another story talking about the inauguration of the Dangote refinery coming up in a few days. May 22nd is the day we are looking at. Hopefully 650,000 barrels per day of oil, refined petroleum. How would this impact, really? So much talk about that.
It should impact a great deal in a sense, but it's not yet Uhuru. The Dangote refinery is not setting up a national petroleum refinery. It's a business, and he's got his eyes on the international market. In other words, he would not, for the sake of lack at home, chooses to then sell back here if it will get him more money from the international arena. But it's good news because it's the refineries on our turf. And so even if we choose to buy at the international selling price, which is somewhere around $70-something as we speak, at least it nets off the cost of transportation. It nets off the period that this product will take to travel down here. And so basically we could just reach for that place and close up supply chain management as we have had. It was just a single Salah public holiday we had, and practically supplies across this part of the country were messed up under the guise that petroleum tanker drivers took 2 or 3 days off, and so they need to work for about a week to bridge whatever that was. So that's in a sense, but it also brings a sense of relief because all of government policies and interventions have been hinged around the takeoff of this refinery. And remember that about 20% of the stake is to be taken over by the federal government. So in a way, the Nigerian government would have a stake in what is the fourth largest petrochemical complex in the world. We hope that in addition to what the Dangote is doing, that Port Harcourt and Warri comes up as soon as possible. I mean, there has been talk about Port Harcourt coming up in the second quarter, which is just about a month or two left. If we can have those, then we can begin to beat the days of importation of goodbye gradually from Nigeria.
All right. Well, other interesting stories. Good news. We have more Nigerian students from Sudan return into the country. So far, we have over 800 of them that have arrived to the country here in Abuja. So good news. We hope to see much more. 800 out of how many now?
4,600.
Exactly.
So there's still so much more to go.
So we still have much more.
But it's kudos to the federal government, alas, that we are seeing a ramping up of the number. Hopefully by the end of today, that should have crossed the 1,000 mark. But still staying with aviation, on a sad note, yesterday we saw the issue with Max Air. Thankfully, there was no death recorded somehow. The pilots, which is a part we are not speaking about, was able to bring that to a safe stop. But something very critical also comes up with this development. The whole talk about the second runway in Abuja that has been abandoned. We learned the airspace was closed for several hours. Imagine some of those Nigerians running away from war that were supposed to touch down were trapped simply because
in their own home country. So trapped trapped outside and trapped within. So you manage to find your way back into the country, and then landing becomes a problem. You know, it can only be
which in itself, you know, triggers another kind of danger. I hope somehow in the last 8 years, this government that has said so much about aviation had managed not to begin the second runway. We've missed out of the opportunity. It is for days like this that second runway becomes even more imperative. One of those days was at the airport when the president was taken off to be at the inauguration of Prince Charles, and practically everywhere was shut down for a presidential movement. So the case for a second runway increasingly becomes imperative.
Yes, it is. I mean, it can only be imagined what would have been the case if this had turned out worse than it did. You had 68 medical doctors on board that Max Air coming from Yola in Adamawa State. That would have been a major disaster. I recall the days that we had, is it Sosoliso aircraft, that you had the generals in there. I recall the impact that had on Nigeria as a country. This time around, losing those doctors, in these days,
in a medical emergency.
We're in a medical
every life
emergency,
is important,
talking
no
about
doubt,
the deficit.
but that level of manpower, we are already losing so much to other countries in terms of brain drain, and this government is now running helter-skelter to promulgate a law that sort of confines them here to have the thought of even losing anybody in that, you know, would have set us back several years.
Thankfully, yeah,
that didn't happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, these are some of the things, or these are some of the stories on the front pages of our newspapers this morning, and the perspectives to some of the stories. We'll be taking a short break, and then when we return, we'll take a look at other issues, the headlines, and also our main discussion for today.
Michael Ogwon.
And I am Ayuba Ila. Thank you for staying with us. You're watching the Daybreak show right here on Trust TV, reaching you from the nation's capital in Abuja. It's an hour into the show already. The show is not about to end. Recall that it was 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Now it's 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. So you have one more hour to go in case you're thinking, well, is the show about to end? No, it's not about to. Well, let's take a look at the headlines once again for those who are just joining. COVID-19, no longer public health emergency, according to WHO.
And police raid kidnappers, then rescue 58 hostages in Kogi.
Enhancing gender digital inclusion for West African women.
All right, the details. The Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, has declared that COVID-19 is no longer a public health emergency of international concern. He made the declaration on Friday after a review of the current evidence that shows that there is a high population level immunity from the SARS-CoV-2 infection, as well as improved knowledge of the virus and management of confirmed cases of COVID-19, a decline in the global burden of the virus, and also a steady increase in vaccine uptake across country. Following the declaration, the Nigerian Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a statement on Sunday disclosing that Nigeria had already de-escalated its COVID-19 response since 2022 in response to local epidemiology focused on encouraging COVID-19 vaccination and recommended discretionary use of face masks and other public health safety measures according to personal risk assessment.
All right, now operatives of the Nigeria Police Force have rescued 58 kidnapped victims held hostage at the Udulu Forest in Gegu local government area of Kogi State, bordering Sardauna Forest in Nasarawa State, and other identified kidnappers' dens in communities contiguous to the Federal Capital Territory. However, one of the victims, Tama Jonathan, unfortunately sustained injury during the rescue operation and died on the spot. FCT police spokesperson SP Josephine Ade said that the rescue was part of efforts by the FCT command leadership in a sustained joint operation with other security agencies, vigilantes and hunters from the various local communities to combat violent crimes in the FCT, rescue victims and bring perpetrators to book.
Operatives of the Nigeria Police Force have rescued 58 kidnapped victims held hostage at Udulu Forest in Gegu local government area of Kogi State, bordering Sardauna Forest in Nasarawa State, and other identified kidnappers then in communities contiguous to the federal government, to the Federal Capital Territory. However, one of the victims, Tama Jonathan, unfortunately sustained injury during the rescue operation and died on the spot. FCT spokesperson Josephine Ada said the rescue was part of efforts by the FCT command leadership in a sustained joint operation with other security agencies, vigilantes, and hunters from various local communities to combat violent crimes in the FCT, rescue victims, and bring perpetrators to book.
All right, so I would say that's for emphasis. That story, we repeated that story twice, but that's for emphasis anyways. Now, President of the Patrick Lumumba Foundation has advised Nigerian politicians to accept whatever verdicts that will come out from the election petition tribunals for the sake of peace and unity of the country. He gave the advice in Lafia, the Nasarawa state capital, while delivering a lecture at the 2023 annual Sir Ahmadu Bello Memorial Leadership and Good Governance Lecture Awards. Correspondent Abubakar Abdullahi sent in the report as presented from our studio.
I am suggesting to Nigeria that the mistakes that have been made are mistakes which offer us an opportunity to improve our electoral system. I'm saying that when the tribunals have looked at all the cases, whichever verdict they arrive at, let the verdicts be accepted in grace. Not because tribunals are perfect, no, but history has taught us that when we want to resolve our disputes and we have chosen certain mechanisms for doing so, once they have rendered their verdict, even in their imperfection, for the sake of good order. We accept them, we grumble, we go home and say, hey, well.
The most important enduring phase of Africa might well prove to be that presented by Nigeria. It is important for Nigeria to succeed, because if Nigeria succeeds, Africa succeeds, and the reverse is true. On this, I completely agree without hesitation to what Professor Lumumba has said.
So I'm a member of the Northern Foundation. As concerned stakeholders in the affairs of northern states in particular, Nigeria in general, and the African continent, deliberately chose the theme, credible 2023 general elections, as panacea for quality leadership.
Of that. And the foundation wants me to plead with all the other governors that most of the, not that we just attend the events, but we go to the extent of making promises about what we will contribute to sustain the foundation. And in most cases, we don't provide what we say about the pledges. So I want you to use the opportunity to do that. They want me to use the opportunity to plead with you, and not just you, but all those who can afford to continue to support this.
And away from that lecture, farmers in Sharawa community in the Daura local government area of Katsina State are passing through hard times as a result of collapse of the Daybreak solar irrigation system. The project, which is being supervised by the National Agricultural Land Development Authority, the farmers said has been abandoned for 2 years. To make matters worse, security guards looking after the equipment at the site are complaining that they have not been paid salaries in 18 months. Gaza Yakubu, who visited Dara, tells us more.
Daybreak solar irrigation system is one of the dam projects in Daura local government area of Katsina State, supplying water to farming communities around its axis. But the sudden collapse of its solar irrigation system has created a huge challenge to farmers relying on the project. The major problems the farmers are faced with are drying up of the water body feeding the irrigation scheme due to climate change and influx of farmers into irrigation farming. An equal huge obstacle is the breakdown of solar energy system, which was provided by the government for over 2 years. These difficulties have increased farming costs, especially as the farmers have to adopt the alternative use of water pumping machine to supply water to their farms.
Solar gwamnati ta kawo mana solar, kuma solar mun ji daɗin ta 100%. Tunda solar nan idan aka tada ta daga nan za ta tsallata titi ta kai ruwa. Kuma talakoki na Dabiran inda aka yi sola, inda gwamnati ta mana sun ji daɗi 100%. To sola yanzu ta lalace, abinda muke kai kuka ga gwamnati, masu gadin nan suna gadi da ana ba su kuɗi, amma yanzu wata 18 ba a ba shi kuɗi ba.
Abdullahi Adamu and his brothers are constructing water canals as an alternative means of irrigation. They will have to use a pumping machine instead of solar that was provided by the government as a source of energy.
Sololin ne an samu damanar da ta wuce, ta zo mana da iska da tsawa duka dai ga sunan. Sun sololin sun fifita, kuma wayoyin sun cicire na cikin sololin. Shi ya sanya kuma ba a zo aka diba ba aka gyara mana su. Shi ya sanya za mu gina wannan saboda in rani Allah ya kai mu lahiya kada amfanin mu ya lalace sai mu rika tadawa muna bar ruwa da shi.
Unlike farmers in Kura, Kano State, benefiting from the Khadija Jamarin River Basin Development Authority, farmers in Sharawa, one of the communities benefiting from the solar irrigation system, cannot produce crop in 3 farming seasons. The challenges of irrigation in this region have overshadowed their farming capacity.
Saboda haka abinda ake roƙon gwamnati ko kuma in ce abin da ya rage yanzu a ce an gina riyoji na ƙasa wanda za su bado ruwa su ba dam ɗin ruwa su taimaka mashi ko da na damana sauka idan ruwa ya ɗauke aka buɗe su suka rika ba da ruwa to ruwa ba zai ƙare ba.
The farmers in Sharawa community say their only source of income is farming. And now that the dam is going through multiple challenges, they can only hope that the government will come to their rescue. Gaza Yakubu, Trust Television News, Daura.
All right. Now, the promise by the president-elect to give workers a living wage and improve their standard of living is viewed as a possible morale booster for the Nigerian workforce. Kabir Lawal spoke to some civil servants in Abuja on what the promise means for the workers. Take a look.
The president-elect, Bola Tinubu, had in a solidarity message on Workers' Day promised more than living wage for workers to have a decent life and provide for their families. For these civil servants, it is cheering news and looking forward to May 29th when he will assume office. They, however, called on government to deploy price control mechanism to address rising inflation in the country.
It's a good news for the workers. At least they will have a very large package to take home, you know, and I hope that our marketers will not destroy the goodwill of Bola Ahmed Tinubu. You know, whenever there is an increase in price, then the marketers will also increase the goods, you know, the commodities prices will go high in the market. So I don't know, maybe government will have to do something about this, about markets as in price control.
It's a very nice idea because we workers were suffering at a long line. If they give you small salary, if you go market now, you buy some things. Before you buy everything now, your money don't finish. So you cannot get anything now. Talk about to pay your children's school fees and the other things. So it's a very good idea. That's what you are praying for.
Some believe the outgoing administration wasted the opportunity to improve workers' welfare through many unfulfilled promises, which made public service unattractive.
They have been promising us, we are not seeing the promises. So if it came to be as a change to others, let's see.
It is actually a good news for government to increase workers' salary. It means money will flow in the market and people will be happy doing their businesses. But the only advice for the government is how to control the price mechanism of the markets so that the inflation will not tell more on the citizens of the country.
By the grace of God, this president can work. All the promise we promise us, by the grace of God, we get hope. Say, he must make sure saying do us the thing we're supposed to be for our country.
They advise the incoming government to fulfill the promise and regulate prices of commodities such that salary increase will no longer trigger inflation. Kabir Lawal, Trust TV News, Abuja.
I think it is fair to say that we are all looking forward to the promises made by Bola Ahmed Tinubu come May 29 to begin to see how he goes about actualizing them. We all cannot wait for a Nigeria that works for everyone. We will take a short break at this point. When we return, we'll look at our first issue of the day. Please don't go away. ones that have the potentials to trigger a potential third world war?
Well, it's a two-way thing because humanity has a penchant for forgetfulness. We forget. Before the Second World War was the First World War. Before then was the 100 Years' War and so on, and so many wars that have happened. And every time that there was such a war with such devastation, the world has a way of coming together to say never again. But almost surely it always happens again. So what happens is that with time, with generations passing by, people or nature or humanity finds a way of forgetting those lessons learned. And even during peacetime, you find out that what we try to do is to perfect our way of fighting. Countries come up with technologies that has more devastation than it was in the past and remove or reduce the kilowatts that is needed for devastation. If you look at, for example, the weapons that were used in the First World War were far different and less damaging than the weapons used in the Second World War. Now, fast forward to what we are having today, you find out that the level of devastation or the capacity of those weapons to cause havoc for humanity are even far greater than what we've had in the past. So, conflict, it seems, is the nature of man. And what we should be more emphasizing on is a multilateral way to which we can manage those conflicts, a way in which we ensure that no conflict is allowed to spiral out of proportion, and where therefore people, when I say people here, members of the international community represented by nations have a responsibility to ensure that they conduct their affairs in a way that we do not go back to those days of fighting full-scale wars with so much devastation for humanity, especially for civilians. Now, we found out that over the years and since the end of the Cold War, since the beginning of the Cold War up till today, you find out that conflict of violence is targeted to civilians. Civilians are the major casualty of those conflicts, of those destructions. Their means of life, their livelihoods, and even themselves as humans become the target of those casualties, thereby bringing untold hardship to the most vulnerable of the society, women and children.
Okay, well, how would you assess the role of the United Nations, for instance, or multilateral organizations in maintaining international peace so far? I mean, these are some of the major reasons why they were created. So in the interest of international peace, the United Nations was created, beginning with the League of Nations and now the United Nations. But if you look at the journey so far, with countries going into war such as the Russia and the Ukraine conflict and the rest of them, how would you assess the effectiveness of the role that the United Nations have played in stabilizing the world?
Well, I hear there are a lot of arguments on this. Well, some people saying that the United Nations have not lived up to its expectations and aspirations of the founding fathers. While that might be true, I want to say that we should also look at the situation if there was no United Nations, if there was no such a multilateral forum whereby people or nations could come and discuss issues and try to find solutions. I understand it's so difficult to have a kind of consensus on issues, to agree on everything. But the fact that there is that platform within which or through which countries can show their approval or disapproval of certain things, to lay complaints, to bring in the international or other members of the international community to discuss issues between them and other countries. I think that's something that we have to give a kind of thumbs up to. Has it achieved what it was meant to? No, in a way, it has done a lot, but there is still room for improvement. We should look at it and say, okay, in a way, kind of counterfactual history to say, what if there was no United Nations? What will have happened? How many wars will we have fought between 1945 that it was set up and now? And how many of such battles, how many devastations? You know, the United Nations not only in terms of physical, ensuring that there is no conflict, but also set standard for certain things, like the use of space for warfare and so on. And it has facilitated so many treaties between nations. It has ensured that there are certain norms and standards are kind of adopted and kind of adhered to by nations, which have also ensured that humanity by its nature, or humanity by the fact that the mere existence of the United Nations and its organs have been better served than if the United Nations was not there. Are there room for improvements? Yes, there are. Are there efforts being made by individual countries? Yes. Either collectively or individually, countries are saying we cannot continue to keep the United Nations the way it is. There must be some reforms. And just like something that is so big as the United Nations, with so diverse membership across the world and across ideologies and so on, that change is going to be tedious, it's going to be long, it's going to take a long time, but it's a fact that, or the interesting, or the fact that nations are talking about that and agreeing that at least there is need for reforms is something that should be of interest to all of us, which is something that is a positive move.
All right. Let me just remind viewers that we are expecting Dr. Taifa Abraham, who is an economist currently in Vienna, to also join this conversation and bring some perspective from the point of view of the economy, whether global or local, to this conversation. Once he comes up, we would bring him straight up to you. But still staying with you, Mr. Salmanu. Now, moving away from the United Nations, in the African region, for instance, since the Second World War, we have been preoccupied with all kinds of regional, or if you like, local wars. The Congos have barely known peace. We know the situation currently is escalating in Sudan, where since 1956 they have had barely 11 years of peace. We all know that Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and Liberia are just beginning to find some level of stability. Would you say that the rest of Africa have learned, given the level of escalations we are seeing in Sudan, South Sudan we thought that with the separation they would know peace. That's another completely devastated place. Have we been able to find a template to sort of keep Africans in peace and to de-escalate tension? Because it appears, like for instance with the case in Sudan, that what we seem to be doing at best is to just fold arms and watch the situation escalate until the point it becomes a full-fledged war with daring consequences for neighboring countries. What's your opinion of what's happening?
Now, so let me try to look at it in two ways. Like, have we learned anything from what has been happening in other parts of the world, or even from the Second World War up to today? What lessons have African nations learned? I would say that the peculiarity of African nations is quite different from a lot of other regions. Now, if you look at the nature of the state as it is, that the Westphalian system and so on, there is a process of state formation. Usually you bring a lot of different people with different ideas, and so on, and try to bring them to adopt something that is higher than them. Now, in that are all other differences that people have, either tribal, ideological, geographical, and so on and so forth. You're trying to melt those people into one. With that, you find out the process is usually very tedious. The process has a lot of upheavals. If we look back into Europe and other countries that we look up to, you find out that there were periods of chaos and upheavals before the nation states as they are today were formed. Now, Africa being a product of that, even though some of those processes were fast forwarded, but you find out that the fact that the cementing takes a longer time, and those differences, even if they were smoothed over, by the colonial masters who came to just draw those lines and so that so and so people are now country and so on and so forth. It would take a very long time for that internal aggregation or kind of internal setting to take place. And these are what we are seeing. But this is also exacerbated by so many other factors. The fact that we are in an international community whereby we, that's Africa here, do not set the rules, because there's a lot of the rules were set before we even joined. So some of these rules are played without us being in the room. We cannot decide some of these things and so on. And a kind of international trade system or economic system that puts us to the periphery, where we are the providers of raw materials, but at the same time, we have to put 2, 3, 4, or even 5 times to get the finished products of those materials that we sold so cheaply, therefore denying us of those sources of, or needed sources for investment, development, and expansion. Without development comes stress on available resources. Now that leads me also to the fact that sustainability of these resources, or the availability of these resources with growing population, every day is becoming less and less available, and the propensity for people to therefore fight over them. And that's what we are seeing, fighting over resources, fighting over what without kind of management, people seem that scarcity or that greed of a few to appropriate so much for themselves to the exclusion of so many. So we're seeing all those factors coming together, an international community that's hostile to Africa, Africa not fitting into that international community also. Then the issue of resources that are not being utilized in a way that is sustainable. Then also the fact that African nations are beginning to understand, or beginning to kind of try to come together as nations. Those differences that were smoothed over before springing up or bringing up their heads. Now, what Africa has done in the past, from the Organization of African Unity up to the African Union, is to kind of say, how do we come together to, in spite of all this, confront these challenges as a region, but also take the best or get the best out of the present situation as it is, while fighting for a seat in the global community of nations where these decisions are being made.
Okay. All right. Well, earlier on, you talk about the need for time for African states to emerge and to evolve into nation states. I'm wondering, how much time really are we talking about? So if you talk about, you know, most of the African countries, for many of them, I'm certain that they've been, they've regained, or I would say they've gained their independence for at least 6 decades now, for many of the African countries. And with that came the idea of having an African Union, which is supposed to play the role of the other leg of the, the points that you've raised about, making sure that Africa has a fair deal. But again, on the other hand, if a country has been have been an independent state for at least 6 decades, shouldn't it have been able to find its feet and be able to chart a course for itself? Where would you put the blame? Is it on the colonialists, or is it on Africans themselves taking their own fate into their hands?
So I will rather not put blame on colonialism, because other nations or other countries also suffered from colonialism, even though if you look at it, that formed the basis or kind of the foundation upon which we built. So to a large extent, yes, colonialism had played a role, but away from that, you find out that if we are going to look at Africa has come of age at 60, you find out that perhaps what countries are we fighting against, or are we kind of, I don't want to use the word fight, but what countries are we challenging? There are countries that are 200 years or more, or 100 and something years, never suffered, or some suffered colonialism some hundreds of years back, and they are the countries that we are struggling for this impact with. Now, if you put it around that, it's like telling a kid of 6 years, well, it was born, so it's 6 years already, and saying that, well, you're already old enough to give an elder who is, say, 20 or 30 years old a fight for their money. While that is a very good aspiration, but that will be requesting or asking of almost the impossible from that. However, not excusing the level at which, or the pace at which African nations are moving, I see that there is a lot that we can leapfrog. We can leapfrog all the stages. We don't have to follow all the stages that other nations followed, and that's why to a large extent we are not doing that. Are we taking the right things or the right steps that because of our peculiarity? Those are also issues that can be debated, because African nations, first of all, have to understand that whereas they can be compared with that, the 6-year-old that I said, when so many 6-year-olds come together, they can fight an adult. So the unity or their strength will be in the unity that they have, and not unity by mere expressions to say we are African Union, but you cannot decide on the simplest of things on how to confront issues of multilateral agreements with other regional blocks or organizations. So acting as one, to a large extent, understanding its differences and peculiar needs, regional and so on, and coming up with the way forward for Africa is the best way to go, in my own view. And that will help us in leapfrogging these stages of development and ensuring that we benefit from the world the way it is, while we contest and kind of pursue a change in the international economic order as it is now.
All right, you talked about what we need to do going forward. A couple of days ago, I stumbled on a video by the Kenyan president, the new Kenyan president, Rotus, where he spoke bitterly about how Africans are regarded, or even the way they are treated, how a single country, be it China, India, or Russia, recently United States, would summon 54 heads of states to a round table, chauffeured in a bus, to a single round table, and be discussing a single deal with the entire African sub-region, and how that it's beginning to look like an insult and the rest. How do we begin to approach the conversation around how to move forward? Because it does appear that our priorities are different. The issue of a single currency, we have not made progress with in nearly over 2 decades. The question of an open sky is almost nearly impossible to achieve, even though we have conversations around them on a daily basis. To move from here to Egypt, or from Egypt, from here to Marrakesh or Casablanca, sometimes you are flown out of the continent to Dubai or Qatar, and then you make a return, or to Turkey, to Casablanca, to go from here to somewhere in the Gulf of Guinea. You are practically flown to Europe to then return you to Sao Tome and Principe. What are those things that we necessarily must begin to converge around, as a panacea, to move that conversation to the level where we can then begin to take care of the little things, that can then unite us as the force that we should be in Africa?
So for me, the issue of good governance tops everything, because when good governance brings the philosophy that the human capital or the citizen is at the center of everything. If all governments, that's African governments, first of all, see the citizen as the centerpiece of everything that government should be doing, then it sure means that every individual country therefore focuses on human development, and that's the welfare of the citizen. Now, if we do that and reach a certain level of development, you find out that naturally some countries will begin to converge together in terms of even the single, the single currency and so many others, because countries that share like philosophies, that share like aspirations, are likely to come together as a means of achieving that, as a means of improving their worth in terms of contesting with other countries outside the region. So for me, if we focus inwards, whereas not also neglecting the fact that we are in a world, a global stage whereby the unity or regional unity is very important, but also look inwards and say, how do we improve and stem this growth or start this growth from within? So that when we reach a certain level, you find out that trade among African nations will improve. By the time that we increase in the number of kind of look at our where we have comparative advantage in terms of manufacture, adding value to our resources, then you find out that if we do that, allow countries that have comparative advantage in certain items to improve them and improve that value, then you find out that the issue of trade among African nations is going to improve. When there is improved trade among African countries, the issue of mobility of either individuals, that's goods and services, and even capital itself will improve, because there will be incentive for other Africans to invest, to work, to kind of participate in other economies of other African nations. Then also, and there are steps that have been taken. I like the framework of the African Free Continental Trade Agreement and other measures that are taken. It looks far-fetched, it looks like a very tall dream, but I tell you that if we go by that and ensure that countries add value based on those advantages that they have, that will spur the issue of economic integration amongst African states. Once there is economic integration, you find out that political and other forms of integration are likely going to be faster, are likely going to be more binding, and are likely going to be more formidable in the sense that instead of those competition, because we're producing the same thing, you find out that there is cooperation because we can make the best out of the market that is out there. So I think the first thing is, let's look inwards, let's improve on our governance, let's look at the citizens at the centerpiece of everything, and from there we can project out a strength that is from within and strong enough to participate and contend with other actors in the international system.
Okay. Now, how would you say, what's your assessment of how African countries have responded to some of the rising security threats and challenges being experienced in recent times? So you have the spread of terrorism in some African countries. You talk about Burkina Faso, you talk about Mali. We have seen these trends kind of truncate or disrupt the democracy in those countries. We've seen military coups in Guinea, in Burkina Faso and Mali as well, and other, African countries. So in terms of responding to some of these recent security threats and challenges, how well would you say we have responded, and whether or not the steps that we are taking in terms of alliances, even with, other foreign countries, has been?
What I would say first is the level of African participation in those conflicts. What do I mean? To what extent are Africans themselves trying to solve those problems? You find out, and I will say that it's improving better than we had in the past. First, because the African Union, through its charter, actually agreed that Africans, unlike during the African Organization of African Unity, whereby internal conflicts were seen as the domain or the internal affairs of countries, the African Union says it's about the citizens, we the people, and that African Union and its other regional organs, that's the ECOWAS and so on and so forth, have the right up to the stage of even militarily intervening in such conflict. Now, what we have seen is more of regional economic communities or groupings taking a larger or a bigger role in ensuring that these conflicts are brought to an end. That means more participation by this regional organization. So regional blocks, for example, you have the G5 Sahel and so on. You have the Multinational Joint Task Force, which is in charge of the Lake Chad Basin and so on. You have even now, as we're talking, the intergovernmental, that's IGAD in the Horn of Africa, and talking much about the issue of the issue happening in Sudan. Before then, you've had where the SADC or the East African East Grid talking about forming up a brigade in the Congo, and even in Mozambique where you had the SADC at some point coming in to say that this is something that we can take on. So continuously African countries or African nations are believing that this is an African problem and Africans have the capacity to provide solution to it. Now we might not be there.
All right.
All right.
So what I'm saying is that
Yeah, you can conclude on your thoughts there.
So what I'm saying is that we might not be there yet, but these are good steps, far from what it has been in the past where countries stood akimbo and did nothing. That though we are not yet there, we are on the right steps. But I urge us, or I'll urge African countries to always look internally first. Just like the resolution says, look at the ways of prevention, but when it happens, the way of reconciliation and building back such communities or such trust that once existed between communities and individuals. So I think that way, if it's adopted that way, and over the years we perfect that, the incidences of conflict or even them spilling over to other countries or prolonging is going to be a thing of the past.
All right. I understand that Dr. Tefa Abraham has managed to join us on this conversation. I am sure he has listened on the submissions made by Salmanu. Dr. Tefa, even though time is not on our side, we would give you a few minutes to give us perspectives. Since the independence, the wave of independence in Africa in the early 50s to the current age, it appears that we basically just got independence and started warring against ourselves. And with all the reports about how many years it needs to take us to catch up with the First or Second World, we seem to be engrossed in fighting over unprocessed resources, over unharnessed resources, or even unexplored resources, such that it has kept us perpetually on our feet. Can you give us an idea? How much has this whole conflict within Africa, or even within countries in Africa, Congo, Nigeria, Somalia, Sudan, has sort of set us back and prevented us from achieving what has been the celebration of potentials of what Africa has the capacity to become?
Okay, thank you very much. After the Second World War, the World War was over, but the war for the world began. Capitalism, socialism. African countries for long sat on the fence. So US, Russia went about pulling African countries to their side. For a long time, neutrality was okay. To not be capitalist or not be socialist was okay. But being neutral became a threat to either the communist bloc or the capitalist bloc. So CIA, KGB, all of them went all out. And then the war became cold. So when African countries got political independence in 1960 or 1957 dependent, their economic independence was still negotiated. So over the years, Europe has experienced World War I, World War II, and many conflicts. But if you visit Europe today, you will not see any trace of war. Infrastructure is back, development is back, food prices are stable. But Africa, one conflict, and then the impact remains for long. African country in the 21st century must choose an alignment. This era of sitting on the fence, we are for Russia today, we are for US tomorrow, is gone. Nigeria and Africa is not in isolation. Countries are closing development gap using espionage, using cooperation. Economic model openly alone does not guarantee a country's development. You must partner with someone. Okay. Saudi Arabia has made stable. So partnership is vital for development. Partnership.
Just in 1 minute, what happens to Africa coming up with its own ideas? Must it align with somebody?
Africa's own ideas must align with a portion of some countries that they can call friends. Already Saudi Arabia is trying to mitigate or mediate for Sudan. If you observe, Saudi Arabia has an interest in that country. So we must find who, like we can be a big brother to, whose interest can become, whose our interest will become their interest, and vice versa. It must be like a bi-relational bi-directional relationship. Very important, very important. So partnership is key for Africa to close all this impact of conflict. Otherwise, even the war in Sudan will be dragged even longer and become like a proxy war for US and Russia. If Sudan keeps sitting on the fence saying we are not for Russia, we are not for US, these countries will continue. The world super bloc have dragged the continent for long. And this thing is not likely to end anytime. If you observe, even in Sudan, there's resource somewhere that everybody is fighting for. Everybody goes to where the grass is greener. So Africa must go to the country that can help guarantee its grass to be greener.
Okay, I wish we have more time really for you to give us your perspective from the economic point of view, but we have to go. It's time for us to end the program. We will make time another time to listen and to have your perspectives on some of these issues. Thank you so much, Dr. Tefa Abraham, for making our time to join us today. And also Musa Salma, Wing Commander Musa Salmanu, retired, who joins us from Lagos. Dr. Tefa Abraham joins us from Vienna in Austria. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining on Daybreak.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's our show for today. In case you've missed, you can always catch up across all our social media platforms and also on our YouTube live stream. I am Ayuba Ile. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
It's a pleasure. You give us free access to your living room, as I always say. We hope we have brought you entertainment, education, and enlightenment. I am Sunday Michael Ogu. Let's do